What does it really mean to be wealthy? Is it the number of acres attached to your name, the value printed on a county record, or the confidence other people hear when they say you are lucky? From a distance, ownership can look like safety. A house without a mortgage can look like freedom. A wide stretch of land can look like a promise that nothing ordinary could ever threaten you. But land cannot reach into a checking account and pay a repair bill. Property cannot become groceries, heat, or medicine unless there is a thoughtful way to turn part of its value into usable money. And sometimes the things that make a woman appear secure are the very things quietly consuming every dollar she earns. This is a story about that uncomfortable distance between looking wealthy and feeling safe. It is about a woman who owned more land than most people would ever walk across in a day, yet stood in a cold kitchen wondering whether she could afford something as ordinary as hot water. More than that, it is about the moment she realized that honoring the past did not require surrendering her future. Her answer did not come from a lottery ticket, a secret investment, or a miraculous buyer. It came from looking directly at numbers she had avoided, questioning a family rule no one had ever written down, and deciding that the life she was protecting also had to protect her. At 61, Elaine Mercer owned 200 acres outside Laramie, Wyoming. The house, the weathered barn, the machine shed, and the long pasture beyond the cottonwoods all belonged to her without a mortgage. People at the veterinary clinic where she worked liked to tease her about being the richest receptionist in the county. They imagined sunrise over open fields, horses at the fence, and a kind of independence that could not be measured by a paycheck. Elaine usually smiled when they said it. She did not explain that she had sold the last of her father's cattle years earlier. She did not mention the property tax bill folded inside a kitchen drawer, the insurance premium due the following Friday, or the section of fence leaning farther after every hard wind. She never told anyone that nearly every repair began with the same private calculation. What could wait, what could be patched, and what would have to go on a credit card. The ranch had become Elaine's in the most emotionally complicated way possible. When the estate was divided, Jean chose investments and the proceeds from another property. Elaine chose the land. No one forced her. She had wanted the kitchen where their mother taught her to make biscuits, the barn where their father recorded every expense in pencil, and the hill from which the house looked almost too small to contain so much family history. For a long time, choosing the ranch felt like choosing loyalty itself. If you believe it is never too late for a woman to rebuild her financial security and create a life with more freedom, subscribe to the channel. These stories are for women who are ready to see money, independence, and their own possibilities differently. The morning everything became impossible to ignore began with silence. Elaine was standing at the kitchen sink before sunrise, waiting for the water to warm. The pipes gave their familiar shudder, but the stream remained cold. She turned the handle farther and held her fingers beneath it. Nothing changed. The old water heater had complained for months. It clicked longer than it should, and the hot water sometimes carried a faint metallic smell. Elaine had written water heater on a list beside south fence and tracked a tire, then kept moving it toward the bottom. There was always something more urgent. That morning, the choice disappeared. The technician arrived just after noon. He knelt beside the tank, removed a panel, and examined the corrosion around its base. Elaine watched his expression before he spoke. She had learned to recognize the face tradespeople made when a repair had stopped being a repair. "I could replace one part," he said, "but I would not tell you that would solve the rest of it. This tank is done." The written estimate was $2,286, including removal of the old unit. Elaine read the figure twice. Then she opened the banking application on her phone. Her checking balance was $174, but the annual insurance payment of $713 was scheduled to leave the account in 2 days. After that, she would have $461 until her next paycheck. The technician waited quietly. Elaine looked through the kitchen window at the pasture, pale under a thin layer of frost. 200 acres. No mortgage. $461 she could actually use. Put it on the card, she said. The words came out calmly. Inside, something collapsed. For the next 3 days, Elaine told herself the water heater was simply bad timing. Everyone had repairs. Everyone used a card occasionally. Her next paycheck would arrive, and she would pay part of the balance. By spring, she would catch up. But she had used the same explanation for the well inspection in August. She had used it when the tractor needed a battery, when the west gate twisted on its hinges, and when the propane delivery cost more than she expected. Bad timing had begun to describe almost every month. At the clinic, Elaine could organize 6 appointment schedules, calm an anxious dog owner, find a missing invoice, and close the register without being off by $1. Her desk was neat. Her handwriting was precise. No one looking at her would have guessed that she avoided opening her own statements until the last possible day. Denise Harper worked beside her at the second reception station. On Monday morning, Denise noticed Elaine warming her hands around a paper cup long after the coffee was gone. "Everything okay at the ranch?" she asked. Elaine almost gave the automatic answer. "Fine, just cold. Busy weekend." Instead, she heard herself say, "My water heater died, and I couldn't pay for a new one." Denise did not rush to reassure her. She did not say that everyone struggled or remind Elaine how valuable the land must be. She simply asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" That kindness was harder to resist than advice. Elaine admitted that she had placed the replacement on a credit card. She described the insurance payment and the fence and the list on the refrigerator. When she finished, Denise glanced at the framed photograph Elaine kept near the telephone. It showed the ranch house from the hill, small and white beneath an enormous sky. "Can I ask you something without making you angry?" Denise said. "What does the ranch cost you every year?" Elaine knew the property tax amount. She knew the insurance premium and could estimate propane. But the honest answer was that she had never added everything together. The expenses arrived in different months and wore different names. A roll of wire in April did not feel connected to a pump service in July. Fuel for the tractor seemed separate from gravel for the drive. Each bill had looked temporary. Together, they had never been invited into the same room. That evening, Elaine carried a cardboard file box from the hall closet to the kitchen table. She opened her banking history on the laptop and began with the previous January. Property tax, insurance, propane, electricity, tractor fuel, weed control, fence posts, well maintenance, gravel, a roof patch on the machine shed, registration for the old truck she used almost entirely on the property. She created a column for expenses connected to living anywhere, and another for expenses connected specifically to keeping 200 acres. Some items had to be divided. She would have paid homeowners insurance on a smaller house, but not at the same amount. She needed a vehicle, but not necessarily one capable of hauling equipment. She made conservative choices whenever she was uncertain. She did not want the ranch to look guilty. She wanted the truth. By 10:30, the total for the previous 12 months was $18,640. It did not include groceries, medical costs, clothing, or ordinary transportation to work. It did not include the new water heater. It was simply the cost of holding and maintaining the property at its current level. Elaine checked the total 3 times. The first time, she searched for duplicates. The second time, she removed 2 purchases that might reasonably have belonged in her personal budget. The third time, she added expenses she had initially forgotten, including the fee for clearing snow from the long drive after her old blade failed. The revised total barely changed. She had hoped a mistake in the spreadsheet would rescue her from the conclusion. Accuracy only made the conclusion firmer. Then she reviewed where the money had come from. Her clinic paychecks covered most months. In the expensive ones, she transferred money from the modest savings left after settling the estate. When that balance fell, She accepted extra Saturday shifts and delayed work on something else. She had not recognized the transfers as a continuing loss because no single withdrawal seemed alarming. Over several years, however, the account that once represented breathing room had become almost empty. That was the quiet danger. Elaine was not facing immediate foreclosure or a dramatic notice from the bank. There was no villain removing money from her account. Her financial security was eroding through ordinary decisions that seemed defensible one at a time. If nothing changed, she might still own the ranch at retirement while lacking the income to maintain it or the cash to leave it on her own terms. Elaine stared at the total until the digits seemed detached from meaning. Her take-home pay from the clinic was just under $37,000 a year. The ranch was consuming more than half of it before she paid for the rest of her life. There had been no single reckless purchase, no luxury vacation, no expensive hobby hidden in a closet. Her problem had accumulated through reasonable bills attached to an unreasonable assumption that because the property was paid for, she could afford to keep it exactly as it was. She pulled out a second sheet and wrote 3 words across the top: ownership, cash flow, and reserves. The ranch belonged to her. That was ownership. Her paycheck came in every 2 weeks while bills left on their own schedules. That was cash flow. The money available when something broke was $461. That was her reserve. For years, Elaine had allowed the first number to silence the other 2. The land might have been worth a meaningful amount, but its estimated value could not pay the technician unless she sold it, borrowed against it, or found a responsible way for it to produce income. Ownership described what she had. Liquidity described what she could reach. Cash flow described whether her ordinary life could continue without a new emergency becoming new debt. An emergency fund was not proof that nothing would go wrong. It was money separated for the things that eventually would. The right amount depended on the person's expenses and circumstances, but the first purpose was simple: create enough accessible cash that a broken appliance, a repair, or a temporary loss of income did not automatically become expensive debt. Elaine did not need a perfect target that night. She needed to stop pretending that 200 acres were the same as money in the bank. Have you ever owned something valuable while still feeling financially insecure? If you feel comfortable sharing, tell us in the comments what that experience taught you. Elaine continued until after midnight. When she divided annual costs by 12, the pattern became harder to dismiss. The property tax was not a surprise simply because it arrived once a year. Insurance was not an emergency because it came in one large payment. Fence repair was irregular, but on a ranch it was not unforeseeable. She began giving those costs monthly amounts on paper, even if the money would remain in her account until the bill arrived. The result showed that her regular income could support a modest home and a modest life. It could not comfortably support every building, every fence line, and every unused acre without some contribution from the property itself. Elaine slept badly. The next afternoon she called her sister. Jean Holloway lived several hundred miles away in a newer house with a small backyard. She visited the ranch twice a year and spoke of it with an affection sharpened by distance. In John's stories, the barn doors never sagged, the winters were always beautiful, and their father was forever walking in from the pasture with snow on his shoulders. Elaine began carefully. I've been looking at the ranch expenses. I may lease part of the north pasture. Jean was silent for a moment. Lease it to whom? I don't know yet. Caleb Foster asked once if I would consider seasonal grazing. I could talk to him and see what it would involve. Dad never lets strangers use that land. Elaine felt the old reflex rise in her. Jean was the older sister. Jean remembered more of the ranch's early years. When she spoke with certainty, Elaine often accepted certainty as evidence. I'm not selling it, Elaine said. Leasing is the first step. Then someone wants an easement, then a longer contract, and one day you barely recognize the place. The place already isn't what it was. We don't run cattle. Half the gates stay closed all year. That doesn't mean it should become somebody else's operation. Elaine looked at the new water heater, bright and out of place against the utility room wall. Are you offering to help with the expenses? The question created a silence different from the first. Jean's voice hardened. So that is what this is about. It is exactly what this is about. You inherited the house and the land, and every bill attached to them. John ended the call soon afterward. Elaine stood in the kitchen with the phone still in her hand. She felt disloyal, then angry for feeling disloyal. Jean had received other assets when their parents' estate was settled. Elaine had chosen the ranch. At the time, that choice had felt like winning the only thing that mattered. Now it seemed that everyone remembered the value she received, and no one remembered the cost she continued to carry. For several days, she did nothing. She went to work, came home, checked the new water heater for leaks, and avoided the file box on the table. The credit card balance waited. So did the land. On Saturday, Elaine decided to clear a shelf in the machine shed where her father had stored old manuals. She was not searching for anything important. She wanted a task with a visible ending. Dust-covered binders labeled by year, along with receipts for seed, veterinary visits, machinery parts, and fuel. Inside a cracked green folder, she found a document bearing her father's signature. It was a grazing agreement from decades earlier. Beneath it were 5 more, renewed across different years. Her father had leased the north pasture to a neighboring operation during a period Elaine remembered only as the time when money had been tight and her mother had returned to school. Tucked between 2 agreements was a page from one of his yellow legal pads. Her father had listed expected income on one side and fence, water and fuel costs on the other. At the bottom, he had written a sentence in block letters: "The land lasts only if the people on it can afford to stay." Elaine sat on an overturned bucket and read it again. Jean had been wrong. More importantly, Elaine had been wrong. She had turned her father's decisions into a rigid rule because rules were easier to preserve than judgment. He had not protected the ranch by refusing every change. He had studied what the family needed and adjusted the use of the land. Elaine photographed the agreements and sent one image to Jean. She included the handwritten sentence but added no message. Jean did not respond that day. On Monday, Elaine called Caleb Foster. His family ran cattle on land adjoining her northern boundary. He had mentioned leasing her pasture several years earlier, and she had dismissed the idea before he finished the question. Caleb arrived that Thursday in a mud-streaked truck. They walked the north pasture together, stopping near the water access and the fence line that needed work. He knew the ground, the condition of the grass, and the distance from his own operation. Elaine felt briefly reassured. The arrangement seemed obvious when viewed from the field. He needed seasonal pasture. She needed income. The land stood between them, capable of solving both problems. At the kitchen table, Caleb proposed $9,600 for the season. The number was larger than Elaine expected. In her mind, the water heater balance vanished. The insurance payment returned to her checking account. She imagined a savings balance with 4 digits, then 5. Caleb slid a short agreement across the table. "This is the same basic form we've used before," he said. "Nothing complicated." Elaine almost signed it. Then she remembered her father's legal pad, expected income on one side, costs on the other. She read the agreement slowly. The landowner would maintain all perimeter fencing. The landowner would guarantee water access throughout the season. The landowner would handle weed control and repair damage to the access road. There was no clear limit on the number of animals, No procedure for ending the arrangement early, and no description of what would happen if water equipment failed. "How much fence work are you expecting?" she asked. Caleb leaned back. "Just whatever is needed to keep the cattle where they belong. The north line needs posts now. Then it probably needs to be handled before turnout. And if the pump fails? The agreement says the owner provides water." He was not threatening her. He was answering honestly. The proposal was useful to him because Elaine would carry most of the uncertainty. She asked for time to review it. The next week, Elaine paid for a limited review by a local attorney familiar with agricultural agreements. She also called her insurance agent to ask how leasing the pasture might affect her coverage. Those conversations cost time and money before the arrangement earned her $1. That bothered her until she recognized the alternative: signing a contract she did not understand because the first number looked like rescue. The attorney did not tell Elaine whether she should lease the pasture. Instead, she helped Elaine identify decisions the agreement needed to make clear. The area included the term, payment timing, animal limits, maintenance duties, water responsibilities, insurance requirements, access, and what would happen if either party failed to perform. Elaine returned to her spreadsheet. She listed potential income, professional costs, repairs she would accept, repairs Caleb would handle, taxes she needed to discuss with a qualified preparer, and money that should remain untouched for future property expenses. The exercise changed the question. She was no longer asking, "How much will he pay me?" She was asking, "What will this arrangement realistically leave me, and what risks will I still carry?" The projections also showed why selling the entire ranch was not the only rational answer. A sale could create liquidity, but it would also require decisions about housing, taxes, transaction costs, and what Elaine wanted her daily life to become. Borrowing against the land could produce cash more quickly, but it would replace a debt-free property with a required payment her salary might not comfortably support. Leasing part of the pasture carried responsibilities, yet it allowed her to test a smaller change without making an irreversible one. For the first time, Elaine evaluated options without turning them into moral categories. Selling was not betrayal. Keeping everything unchanged was not automatically loyalty. Borrowing was not automatically failure, and leasing was not free money. They were financial choices with different effects on cash, risk, work, control, and future flexibility. Her task was to understand those effects well enough to choose deliberately. When she met Caleb again, Elaine proposed leasing a defined portion of the north pasture rather than every available acre. She offered to complete one specific section of fence before the season. After that, routine damage related to his use would be his responsibility. They established an animal limit, documented the condition of the access road, and agreed on what would happen if the water system became unavailable. Caleb pushed back on several terms. He lowered the payment because the included acreage was smaller. Elaine felt her confidence waver each time the number dropped. She reminded herself that gross income was not the same as useful income. A larger check attached to unlimited obligations could leave her poorer. After 2 meetings, they reached an agreement. It would not solve every financial problem. It would create a manageable contribution from land that had previously produced only expenses, while leaving Elaine control of the house, the barn, and the acres closest to them. Jean called the evening before Elaine signed. "I saw the documents," she said. Elaine waited. "I didn't know Dad had leased pasture." "Neither did I." Jean exhaled slowly. "I suppose I liked believing the ranch stayed exactly the same after I left." Elaine looked around the kitchen. The cabinets had been repainted twice. The old wood stove was gone. A new water heater stood behind the utility room door, carrying a balance she still had to pay. "It never stayed the same," she said. I was just the one here watching it change. Jean began to explain that she had only wanted to protect what their parents built. Elaine understood, but she no longer accepted the explanation as authority. You can love this place, Elaine said. I want you to love it, but you cannot make financial decisions about it unless you are willing to share the financial responsibility. The words were not cruel. They were accurate. That made them powerful. Jean did not offer to pay the bills, and Elaine did not ask again. They ended the call without resolving every old feeling. Yet something important had changed. Elaine no longer needed Jean's permission to make a responsible decision about the life Elaine was actually living. Have you ever had to make a financial decision that your family did not understand? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may help another woman feel less alone. The lease payment arrived in 2 scheduled portions. Elaine did not treat the first deposit as extra money. She gave every dollar a purpose before spending it. The balance on the water heater was paid first. Part went into a dedicated account for property taxes, insurance, and known seasonal costs. Another part became the beginning of an emergency fund that was separate from the ranch account and separate from daily checking. She began transferring a small amount from each clinic paycheck into that reserve. The transfer was not large enough to impress anyone. It was small enough to continue. Elaine set a calendar reminder to review the balance before every transfer, so that automation would not create an overdraft during an expensive month. The hardest change involved accepting that the lease income did not excuse her from reducing costs. New income could disappear as quietly as old income if the system stayed unchanged. She stopped heating the unused office in the machine shed. She sold no heirlooms and made no dramatic purge. Instead, she cancelled a separate insurance rider on equipment she no longer owned, combined 2 maintenance visits where practical, and created a schedule for predictable work before it became emergency work. She also met with the clinic's benefits coordinator about the retirement plan she had postponed joining. Elaine had avoided the conversation because she feared hearing that she was too late. No one told her that. They discussed the plan available through her employer, what she could currently afford, and where to find qualified help for decisions beyond the coordinator's role. Elaine began with a modest contribution and left room to adjust it as her cash flow became clearer. There was no single afternoon when the ranch became affordable. Progress arrived through quieter evidence. The property tax month came, and the money was waiting in its designated account. Elaine paid the bill without moving grocery money or adding to her card. When the insurance renewal arrived, she compared the coverage with the actual property and asked questions she had once been embarrassed to ask. Some costs remained high because rural property was expensive to maintain. Knowing that did not make them disappear. It made them visible early enough to plan. The arrangement with Caleb created work too. Elaine inspected the agreed fence section, tracked the payment dates, and kept records. One gate needed attention midway through the season, and the written agreement made responsibility clear before resentment could grow. The lease was not passive income floating in without effort. It was a limited business arrangement with duties, uncertainty, and a realistic net benefit. There was an early moment when Elaine nearly regretted everything. After several days of heavy rain, Caleb called to report deep ruts near the access point. Under the old one-page proposal, Elaine might have assumed the repair was entirely hers, paid quickly, and resented him afterward. The signed agreement required them to document the damage and distinguish ordinary access from damage related to use. They met at the gate, examined the road, and agreed on the work each would cover. The conversation was not warm, but it was clear. Elaine left without the familiar sensation that being agreeable had cost her money she could not afford. The document had not eliminated conflict. It had given the conflict boundaries. That experience taught her something the spreadsheet could not. A good financial arrangement did not depend on everyone remaining generous, lucky, or in a good mood. It anticipated that interests might differ and decided how responsibility would be handled before pressure made the decision for them. That distinction mattered to Elaine. She no longer described any financial choice as free money. Every option used something: time, land, labor, flexibility, or risk. Her job was not to find a solution without trade-offs. Her job was to choose trade-offs that supported the life she wanted. By late autumn, the emergency account held $4,380. It was not enough to replace every system on the property. It was enough to change the next conversation with a repair technician. The ranch account also held money reserved for annual bills, which meant Elaine no longer counted it as available simply because it appeared beside her name. She kept the original water heater estimate in the front of her financial folder. It was not there to punish her. It reminded her that the most important number that day had not been the market value of the ranch. It had been $461, the amount she could reach after the insurance payment. Each month, when Elaine reviewed her accounts, she asked whether the amount she could reach was becoming more capable of protecting the life she actually lived. Some months the answer advanced slowly. A larger propane bill reduced what she could transfer. A clinic paycheck with extra hours allowed her to add more. She no longer treated a smaller contribution as failure or a larger one as permission to spend. Consistency mattered more than drama. The reserve grew because it had a purpose, a separate place, and a system that could survive an imperfect month. One evening, Denise visited for dinner. She stood at the kitchen window watching cattle graze far beyond the cottonwoods. "So now you really are the richest receptionist in the county," she joked. Elaine laughed. Months earlier, the same comment would have tightened something inside her. "Not even close," she said, "but I finally know which dollars are mine to spend." After dinner, Elaine washed the dishes while hot water clouded the window above the sink. The replacement heater was no longer a humiliating charge waiting on a statement. It had become the first honest signal that ownership alone was not security. She thought about her father's note. The land lasts only if the people on it can afford to stay. For years, Elaine had heard only the first two words, the land. She had missed the people. She had missed herself. The following spring, she and Caleb would review the arrangement rather than renew it automatically. If the costs changed, the terms would have to change. If the land needed rest, she would consider that. If Elaine's own needs changed, they would count too. Keeping the ranch no longer meant promising that nothing would ever be different. It meant making conscious decisions while she still had choices. Jean visited shortly before winter. The sisters walked to the northern fence, where the grass had begun to fade into its cold season color. Jean admitted that she had used the ranch as proof that one part of their family could remain untouched. Elaine listened without surrendering the boundary she had set. "I'm glad it is still here," John said. "So am I." "And you?" Elaine understood the question. "I'm still here too," she said. "That has to matter just as much." They walked back toward the house without forcing the moment into perfect reconciliation. Jean had not become responsible for the ranch. Elaine had not erased years of resentment. But the truth was finally standing between them, and neither woman pretended not to see it. Elaine still owned 200 acres. She still earned an ordinary salary. Wind would loosen posts, equipment would wear down, and bills would continue arriving. Her victory was not escaping those realities. It was ending the belief that possessing something valuable automatically made her financially safe, or that changing how she used it meant she had failed. Maybe freedom is not always found in owning more. Sometimes it begins when we finally ask whether the things we are protecting are also protecting us. Elaine kept her land, but she stopped allowing it to consume the future she still had time to build. She did not become wealthy overnight. She became honest, prepared, and able to choose. For her, that was the first form of wealth that could actually keep her warm. Before you go, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It is always meaningful to see how far these stories travel and how many women in different places are rebuilding their lives one decision at a time. Thank you for spending this time with us. There is another video waiting for you right beside this one. It explores a similar financial struggle and may help you see your own situation from a new perspective. I will meet you there.